Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Becky Allan, and I'm the CFO here in Academy School District 20. This is the third of different budget town halls that I've done. Now, the good news is if you missed the first two, no problem, because they're not like part one, part two, part three. Each of them really is the same information, but wanted to make sure that there were lots of options for folks. So before I start, I want to let you know that how this is going to work. So for a lot of the times you'll see me just like this, and I might be writing things on the whiteboard and just talking to you directly. But every so often I'm going to ask my friends, there's other people here with me. In fact, they're going to wave now. This is the communications team here, and they're the brilliant minds that get to set all this stuff up. If it was up to me, we'd be in trouble. So they are here, and so occasionally I'm going to ask them to put up a slide and you'll see something, but then it'll come back to me. Now, you know, with Teams, please, if you have any questions along the way, just put it in the chat. Allison and the team will watch the chat, and if they see some themes of questions that they should throw in, they'll stop me right then and ask me to answer it. And then we'll have a time specifically for questions at the end, but don't hold on to it. If you've got a question, please put it in there. And Allison, I promise, is watching, and she'll try to group them together the best we can. There's also a couple questions that I always get, so at the end I'm going to answer those too. So chances are many of you have some of those, what I call like a popular question. So my hope is when you leave the time today, and I know your time is precious, so I want to make sure that it's something valuable for you. So by the time we leave, I hope that you understand a little bit more about school finance. And you know, this is only my third year as CFO. Up to then, I really had an instructional side. I was a high school math teacher in Lewis Palmer, and then I came to District 20. I was a dean at Pine Creek, and I was a TOSA for assessment and assistant principal and principal at Discovery Canyon. And then I worked in learning services for 5 years before this position. So I'm going to be honest, a lot of what I've learned about school finance has been in these last 3 years. So I hope you leave today feeling like, ooh, I have a little bit better sense. And I also hope that you have a sense of what we're working on for our budget for next year. What are our top priorities? So if those two things are accomplished, then I'm going to feel like it was that my purpose was met for today. So again, thank you for being here, and let's go ahead and get started. So would we please put on slide number 1 is going to take over here. And it's our timeline slide. And there it comes. So you should see a timeline in front of you. And what you see is from left to right, you see basically our entire fiscal year this year, which is 21, 22. And so that's July of 2021 through June of 2022. That's our fiscal year, and it aligns with our school year. Now we have to have a new budget adopted in June, because by July 1 of 2022, which is the part all the way in the right in green, that's the first day of the new fiscal year. So we have to have a budget ready. And so what I'm going to do today is kind of take you through the main process of how we build that budget for green there in July, and what are some of the pieces that go into doing that, and what are some of the realities of how we get our funding. So I'm going to start with what's in purple first, which is November. It already happened. I'm talking about November 2021. This is the first time when we get a glimpse at maybe what our per pupil revenue is going to be from the state. And the state gives us the money per student to run our organization. And so this is the first time in purple when we get a chance to see. So I'm going to ask my friends now to put me back on the screen. All right, so per pupil revenue, what I've got here in this box, this is the per pupil revenue amount that we're getting per student this year. It's $8,439. The other big variable is how many students we have. That's why if you're in a school district with declining enrollment, it's so impactful financially, because you get money per funded pupil. And so if your funded pupils are going down, then certainly your funding goes down, and it tends to be a difficult situation. For us, there's only been 1 year that we've ever had a dip in enrollment. And my friends are going to just show a slide real quick to show you that enrollment. So this V that you see, that green bar, that's the first time that we've ever had a dip in enrollment in District 20. And I'm going to come back to this slide in a minute, but they're going to cut back to me now. So how does it work for funding? Let's start by looking at just our current per pupil revenue, and then I'm going to talk about what it means when I said in November we had our first glimpse at what our funding was going to be. So if you've heard me speak before, you know that I use the analogy of a bucket to explain the funding that we get in a school district. Now this bucket is called total program funding. Now, there are 178 school districts in the state, and each school district has its own size bucket. So one school district's bucket may be this big, another one this big, because it depends on how many students and it depends on the per pupil revenue amount. Well, how do they come up with this? It's $8,439. Well, some school districts, it might be $19,000 a student. Some it might be $10,000 a student. How does that work? So imagine this. Everybody's per pupil revenue, no matter what school district you're in, starts with the same base amount. And that base amount increases year to year based upon the rate of inflation. Now, you've probably heard a lot of times about the inflation that we're experiencing now, and it's somewhere in the 7%, 7.9%. But for this, it's in arrears. So do you know that the base for next year is only going to go up 3.5%? That's the rate of inflation that the state is using, even though we know things have gotten a lot more expensive. So this base amount is what every school district gets. But you can imagine, let's say there's me and every CFO, so 177 other CFOs standing somewhere. We have like a box in front of us. It's got this base amount. Well, the base amounts are going to change based on the characteristics of that school district. Just like when you go buy a car, there's kind of a base model, right? Then, well, I want tinted windows and I want a sunroof and I want, and that changes the price. Well, very similar with this. There's a base, and then depending on the characteristics of each school district, you kind of put those ingredients in, and it bounces out what the per pupil revenue for your district is. They're laughing here at my noises here that I make. And you're like, this is our CFO, or what, making noises? So let's talk about some of the characteristics. One is size, and you're probably thinking, great, District 20, large size, that must make our per pupil revenue really high. It's the opposite. We are considered a large school district. However, think about it. Let's think we have a school district with 100 kids total. Well, they still need school buses, social studies, math, they need the lunch tables, cafeteria, they have a football team. They have no economy of scale. Very small districts might have a per pupil revenue amount of almost $20,000. So our size factor actually keeps us on the small end. Another factor is the cost of living in the area. Another one is your at-risk student count. At risk refers to students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch. Now, we certainly do have students who are eligible for free and reduced. However, compared to some other school districts, it may not be as much. District 11 is a perfect example. I'm going to let you know what I mean. We're about the same size. We're a little bigger than District 11, but District 11's at-risk count is much higher. And here's an example. So ESSER funds are the funds that we've been getting to help with our COVID relief. And ESSER 3 was based on this at-risk calculation. This is not different than per pupil revenue, but it just gives you an example of what I mean. So District 20 for ESSER 3 got a little over $8 million, and I'm grateful for that. But just to give you an idea of the impact of a factor like at risk, District 11 got just under 60 million. So that gives you an idea of how that type of factor can change things. So everybody puts all their boop, 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 chip, and you have your per pupil revenue amount. Now, would you believe it? In District 20, we used to be last, 178 out of 178. Now we're second last. We are ranked, if you look at the whole list of all 178 school districts, the per pupil revenue amount we get in District 20 is number 177 in the state. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, in some respects, I don't want that, but I think of it as a point of pride. Think about what's accomplished in this school district, and we are funded second to last in the entire state. So it's pretty incredible. And again, that dollar amount comes from the state, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Now let's talk about total program funding and what that means. So what happens is we have this bucket, and it represents the total amount of money that we can collect from local property taxes and from the state. And it's based on our per pupil revenue amount and the number of kids we have. And what happens is there's two different ways that this bucket gets filled. The first way is we've got what I call like blue sand or green sand. I picked up the wrong one. All right, here's blue. I think of blue for District 20. So imagine all the local property taxes for District 20 are poured in, and it's going to go up to a certain amount. That's the property taxes that we collected in District 20. Okay, that's all we have. So the state has to get their sand out and fill the bucket up to the top. So that's what they do. And that's how our bucket gets filled. But guess what? The state doesn't have enough sand to fill everybody's bucket to the top. It's not smooth across the top. They say, I'm sorry, I don't have enough sand for everybody's bucket. So we can just fill you, we'll fill you to about here. And sorry, we knew that you were supposed to go all the way to the top, but I'm sorry, you have to have a gap. This has a fancy name. It's called the budget stabilization factor. It's a fancy name for your cut. You're not getting all that you're supposed to get. Every school district is impacted by this. And here's the amount I'm talking about. So this year's budget stabilization factor, this gap in our bucket in District 20 is 15.6 approximately million dollars. Last year, because of COVID, we had a lot of budget challenges. It was $32 million. The year before that, 15.6 million. Now, that's a lot of money. I don't know about you, in my personal life, I do not deal with millions very often, if ever. So what could that buy? A 1% salary increase for everyone in District 20 is about $1.6 million. So can you imagine if there was enough sand to fill to the top? So this is an important reality in our funding from the state. So now I talked up on that slide. Remember I said in November, the governor, we have some information about what we think the per pupil revenue amount might be for the next year. It's kind of the governor's way to do a shot across the bow to say, this is what I'm requesting, the governor speaking. This is what I'm requesting for 22-23 for the budget. K-12 education and a whole bunch of other stuff too. So it was good news in what we saw in November. But I always tell people this is not the type of info you write in Sharpie. Because when we're getting that info in November, highly unlikely it's going to last all the way until May when a final decision is made. But the per pupil revenue amount based on what the governor shared in November would be about $8,985. That's over $500 more than what we currently have. That would mean for us, if this came true, about 11.6 million additional revenue that we don't currently have. It would also lower our budget stabilization factor. It would shrink that gap. Remember I said now it's like 15.6 million. It go down to about 11.5 million. So that's a good news story. But that's just the first attempt of the governor. So now that gets our mind, our wheels turning, but we don't know for sure what's going to happen. So let's look at the slide with the timeline and see where we are now. So we're in February. But let's back up a little to the January part that's in yellow. I told you a little bit ago that our student enrollment is a critical variable in figuring out what our bucket size is going to be, how much funding, because we get money per student. Well, we're certainly not going to know how many students we have in October next, but we have to make a guess. So in January, we make enrollment projections. That's where we make our best guess on how many students we're going to have next year. It's hard, especially during COVID. It's not as cut and dry. We use historical averages and historical actuals down to the classroom. We don't just make one big number up for the district. We literally get a number for each grade level at each school is what we make a guess at. We also have demographers information and principals information. So let's go to the enrollment slide real quick and we'll show, again, I had shown you this a little bit earlier. The red one is the year that COVID hit in March. It's been about a year, right? That's 1920 October count. It's pre-COVID. In October, we didn't know about COVID. That was our enrollment. We took quite a decline, almost 900 students to go to last year, 2021. And then you can see this year our enrollment has gone up almost 700 students. So that's a good news story. We've really shown a tremendous amount of recovery. And if you look off to the right in the gray box, that's what we worked on in January. Again, we have this down to the grade level, down to the school, but you can see that we're still showing another increase for next year. Not huge, overall about 92 students in the school district, but remember, it's tough with all the COVID aspects. That's our best guess, and non-charters are a portion of that, because when I give you an overall number like that 26,000 number, that includes our charters. So if you just look at non-charters, you see that number down below. So for non-charters, about a little over 100 students we're planning on getting new. Might be more. Might be less. We can only do our best thinking now, and we have to run with it. And then we true it up next year when we know exactly what the final answer is. Let's go back to the timeline. So that happened in January. Now let's look from that range of January to May. See that gray box above the line? It runs from January to May. That's when the Colorado General Assembly is convening, from January 12th to May 11th. That's the group, that's our representatives and our state senators. They work through the Joint Budget Committee at the state level to come up with the School Finance Act. So that per pupil revenue amount, that's what they finalize through their work. Every Thursday morning at 8 a.m., we have, in this time, mid-January to mid-May, we have a Pikes Peak Alliance meeting. What is that? We hire, along with other school districts in the Pikes Peak region who want to participate, we hire a lobbyist that we meet with every Thursday at 8 a.m. virtually. That lobbyist works at the Capitol. They know the laws, the bills that are being introduced. They know the pros, the cons, they share it with us. We say, that sounds great. We say, oh no, that doesn't sound great. We would like to have the Pikes Peak Alliance oppose that bill. Oh, this sounds okay, but lobbyists, would you please share up with your contacts that this would be a lot better if ... So we stay very in tune, myself, Mr. Gregory, our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Tanya Thompson, General Counsel, Dr. Smith is there as well. And we listen to this, we learn about it, we give our input, but it's really important that we keep the pulse on what's happening at the state level because it is absolutely critical to us. And it's our way to have a voice. It doesn't mean if we say we don't like something that it might not go into play, but at least we are advocating for the interests of kids and staff and families in District 20. So that keeps going. Also during this time, what you see in the pink, the February, March, and April, the Joint Budget Committee is continuing to run. And when they land somewhere new on a new version of what they're thinking about, then we get another, it's called a run. All the numbers go to CDE, we get a run from them of what would that mean for the per pupil revenue. And before I show you, because we did get some new information in February, the other thing on this timeline in the pink is that cabinet is working. I asked them to make a list of must-haves and a list of nice-to-haves. And could you please go back to me on this? Thank you. So it's funny because if you looked at the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, you'd say, well, Becky, a lot of these nice-to-haves look pretty important. There are many things that are important, but I'm going to tell you what the top two things are this year that we are focusing on for next year. Number one, salaries. And number two, benefits. For salaries, we know our starting salary for a first-year bachelor's degree teacher is $42,025. We want to see that higher. We know that if you compare that with other degrees, other bachelor's degrees from other majors, it is not competitive. We know that it's below a firefighter, a nurse, other folks in our community who are doing a police officer, who are doing great work. But the teacher pay lags behind. We want to do all we can to move that up. Secondly, as another example, our classified salaries. Some of our folks are still in the $13, the $14 an hour. You know, In-N-Out Burger, $18. Needers, they say, we need you, KNEAD, the salaries are $18, $19 an hour. King Supers, etc. Our values are not competitive to those outside entities, and we know that. Now, I wish I could stand here on the salaries and tell you this is what we're going to do. The problem is I don't know yet. I can tell you we are pushing as far as we can in our planning, but we can't announce anything yet because we don't know our final per pupil revenue amount. So just know that that is our prime concern. Another one is benefits, and I mean a couple things here. One example is trying to reduce our health care benefits. Now, the good news is this. In the last 2 years, each year, the Kaiser premiums have gone up significantly. They went up 7.5% one year and 15% one year. But us, like at the district, we absorbed all those extra costs so that in staff, like me as a staff member too, we saw our monthly premiums stay the same, but the costs went up for the district. The good news is that Kaiser presented us with an option late summer and said, look, if you say you'll go with us, we will lock you in at 0% for 22-23. We took that opportunity. So we know that we're not going to have to pay any more to Kaiser next year. So we're saying, look, is there a way that here in the district we could absorb more so that monthly premiums for staff could go down next year? So we are looking very hard at that. Another thing we're looking at, as you know, with your staff leave, you know that you can only collect like 90 days worth. And it takes years to get to that point. But when you have a full amount of 90 days, you can't add on more. Any extra goes to the sick leave bank. So Cameron Smart, our assistant sup for HR, he's running a committee right now looking at some different options. Like maybe on an annual basis, if someone has, making this up, 96 days, they can receive some money for the 6 days over the 90. Still always have to have 90, but maybe I can get some money back as a staff member for the overage. You're not going to get rich on that amount, but it's something to say, hey, yeah, you didn't use these days, so here's a monetary equivalent. Or maybe there's something when people leave the school district after 10 or 15 years. These are things that we're looking at, and the committee is going to make recommendations. Again, on both of those things, I don't have firm answers yet, but these are the things that are top priorities. With that, though, we also have some other must-haves. As an example, para. Para is increasing in 2023. Employers have to put in another 0.5%, and all staff have to put in another 0.5%. Well, for the district, that's over $650,000 more that I've got a budget for. Our insurance premiums, not health care. I mean like our liability insurance and property insurance, just like it does for you as a homeowner, ours is going up. I have to budget another $200,000 for that. So there are some things that, just like you as a homeowner, it's just something we have to take care of. So we have to plan for all of that. That's why our list of nice to haves look really important. They are, but we can't make them all happen. It might be a new position somewhere or something along those lines. And Cabinet is looking at those now and trying to prioritize what they may be. But again, I want to tell you, number 1 and number 2 are staff salaries and staff benefits. And I'll let you know more in a little bit when we'll know more. It really is that May timeframe when we'll have a better sense of where that's going to land. And again, during this time, all the way up to that May timeframe when we hope to know our for real per pupil revenue amount, CDE might come out with another run. Here's what they did in February. They said they were doing some work in the Joint Budget Committee. They said, now here's what we have. $9,098. We want to cut that budget stabilization factor even more. We want to shoot for putting it in half. Do you know how much the budget stabilization factor is in the whole state? Over $500 million. If this plan went through, it'd cut it in just about half. So our budget stabilization would go to $7 million. And instead of having 11.6 million in new dollars, be closer to 14 million. So that's what we do. We keep monitoring this and making adjustments and saying, well, now I think I maybe can push. That's what it looks like as we're going through this process. And that's why we don't have all of the answers right now. Would you please show the timeline slide again? So now let's go to the blue one and let's kind of fast forward to May. That's when the legislative session ends at the state. Now the last 2 years, it was tough because there were recesses due to COVID. We didn't get final numbers on per pupil revenue till like the end of May, beginning of June. And that's really tough because in May I have to do the proposed budget for the board. So my fingers are crossed. It's in everyone's best interest that we get this number as early as we can, because then I can tell you what the real number is too. But no matter whether we know the final number or not, in May, I will be presenting the proposed budget to the board. And we hope, I put a question mark in there, but I hope we have an approved into law School Finance Act with the final per pupil revenue amount. And that is when you get your memo saying, this is the salaries these are the salary increases, the health benefits, whatever it might be, that are being proposed to the Board of Education. It changed still last year because that legislative session kept going due to COVID, but this year I'm hoping it takes a more traditional track timeline-wise. Then we move into June and we look and see that's when the board adopts our budget. And again, perhaps there's another memo that goes out if there's been a change from what happened in May. Last 2 years, yes, that happened. So now I want to move in, and you could put it, is it on me?
No.
Okay, well, let's go one more slide. Let's leave it on there for 1 minute, and let's go ahead and go to this slide. So what can you do? And I promise I'm going to take some questions here coming up, but what can you do? Every time I mention per pupil revenue, it goes to the state. It goes back to them. That's where that number comes from. And I can't change that we're 177 out of 178, but if you want to advocate for District 20, that would be wonderful. I have at the top of that slide, you can see there's a link there that if you want to find out, if you're not sure who your state senator or state representative is, you can look them up at that particular website, and you can reach out to them and tell them what your thoughts are. Now, here in District 20, what is happening? Well, there's something called a mill levy override. What is that? It's actually something that goes on the ballot for voters to examine and to decide if they want to vote yes or no for it. It's a way that it allows us to generate more income to keep locally for the school district. It's in essence an increase in the tax rate that our community says yes or no to. But we keep those dollars because I'm going to be honest. And you can now go ahead and you can put it back on me. I'm going to be honest. For the types of dramatic changes that we would like to make in salaries and benefits, we're going to need more than the state mechanism if we want to do that quickly. And so, because that, I don't know that we could ever make those strides in the near term, looking at the funding mechanism we have for the state. So we're exploring this mill levy override piece. And I had shared in a board work session with our Board of Education in January these thoughts, and they said, you know what, let's go out, let's have some focus groups with our community and see if our community has interest in us looking at a mill levy override. So that, and I'm pointing here to the communications team, because that's what Allison and her team are working on now. They're going to be running some focus groups to collect some information. Is the community say this is a good thing, or are they saying, no, this isn't something that we think we'd have a lot of support of right now? So that's something that we are also exploring, and more to come when we get more information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you 2 questions that I typically get. And then Allison's going to share with me other questions that you may have. But these are 2 popular ones, and actually 3. I'm going to make it 3, because the first one I think I've already answered. Becky, why are you not telling me now what my salary is going to be next year? I hope that you know that answer now. It's because the legislative session is still in session, and we hope that it wraps up in May and that we have some good indicators of what the per pupil revenue amounts are going to be. Now, I also say too that the closer we get to that time, it's kind of like a hurricane. You know, you watch the Weather Channel in the summer, they say a hurricane is going to blow into town. We think into this particular location in the United States, I don't know, in a week. And they have that cone of uncertainty, right, of where it might hit. Well, if I tune into the Weather Channel 3 days later, probably a little more, they have maybe the cone has lessened a little, better chance they know where it's going to be. Then if it's the day before, we pretty much know where it's going to hit. Similar with this, as we get closer to May, we hope to have a better sense of where the per pupil revenue amount is going to land. But this is why I can't tell you right now, because I don't know it myself. We're just using the best indications that we can from the state, but we've got a cone of uncertainty that we have to deal with. So we can't just decide right now, because it might not be the best decision. Secondly, I get this question as well. The question I get is, Beck, I think you're full of hot water, because when I drive around the school district, I can see growth everywhere. You cannot tell me that you don't have a full bucket. I see construction, I see houses, I see Great Wolf Lodge and Shields and all of these things. So let me explain to you why that doesn't mean that we all of a sudden have a bunch more money in District 20. Let's go back. Let me just pretty this bucket up here a little bit that we started with in the beginning. Okay. And you know, I was a math teacher and nobody ever accused me of being a good artist. Okay, I would draw lots of things that nobody knew what they were. So thank you for bearing with me on my lack of artistry here. So remember, this is our bucket, right? It represents what the money we get based on the per pupil revenue amount and the number of kids. And then how does that bucket get filled? We pour all our local sand in for local property taxes. The state puts the rest of their sand in, but remember, it's a little short. That's a summary. All right, so in my last example, let me go back to my blue marker. I don't know, I had our money, our sand, the District 20 sand about there. So yes, it's true, our assessed valuation, and that's a great thing, in our school district has increased. It continues to increase. We're doing well. And that's great because that means we have families coming to us and our enrollment is on the upswing and we're somewhere where folks want to be. So let's say, yep, the assessed valuation went higher. Okay, so let's put more. Now here's what happens. Remember, the state comes in with their green part, their green sand. Well, they pour it in right here. But look, it still has the gap at the top. The top marking doesn't change because I put more blue sand in from District 20. It doesn't mean that the state says, just keep pouring. District 20 put in more, keep going. It still stays at the top, or it still stays less than the top. There's that same gap. Likewise, if I erased all this blue, the state then would fill it in with all the green. So our scenario of having more blue in here just means that the state's contribution is less. It does not mean we have extra money or we get to overfill the bucket, or the state says, that's all right, we'll give you what we would have even, and that we end up getting to the top. It doesn't work. And again, I did not realize that before I came into this position. And that's an important thing for folks to know. And again, assessed valuation that's increasing is good. It's good for our whole area, but it doesn't all of a sudden mean we have newfound money that we are able to use. The last popular question that I get that I want to address, and then I'll take whatever ones you have, unless Allison, you have any for me at this point?
We'll wait till the end.
All right, so I'm going to erase this part. And I'm going to share with you the other big question I get. Becky, you have reserves in the district of $27.7 million. That's what we have based on the January mid-year for this budget year. That's the amount we project we're going to have in our reserve at the end of this year. So $27.7 million. I think I'll go with the other marker, it's a little darker. Now, this is what we call unassigned fund balance. Let's make an analogy to us at home. Okay, so hopefully if we can, we've got some type of savings account for something unexpected. And if we've got a savings account, let's say with $3,000 in it, and that's just for, I don't know what, it's if I have a flat tire, if the refrigerator breaks, we have some reserve, we have some savings. That's what this is, and we can spend it on what we want, whatever we need at the time. Obviously, we'd have to spend the district's money on something appropriate for a school district, but it doesn't have a lot of limitations in terms of I could spend it on curriculum or a broken window or a salary one-time bonus. I could do all that. I have flexibility. We also have some assigned fund balances, which are like reserves, but they have to be spent on a certain thing. For example, we have to keep what's called a TABOR reserve, and we can't just spend that on whatever we want. We have a risk management reserve. That helps us for things like when we had that bad windstorm in December, we had about $500,000 in expenses with that. We go in here. What analogy is that to your personal life? I've got my savings account, and then let's say I've got a college savings account. I'm putting money in there, but I can only spend it on college for my children. That's the difference in unassigned versus assigned. In our personal life, well, we have the same thing with the school district. So this unassigned fund balance, this is based on, again, the money that we think we're going to have at the end of this year, $27.7 million. Now, if you think about, have you ever heard like a financial advisor say for your own savings account, your personal, try to have 6 months of expenses available or what have you? That's a tall order. What would this amount do? This year's budgeted expenditures, the numbers are uncanny. They're very similar, 27.7. $277 million is what our expenses are budgeted for this year. If you do the math, this savings, if you will, would get us 5.2 weeks. If we had no other income and we had to meet our expenses only using this, we could operate at the level we're operating at now for 5.2 weeks. Now, as we think about these dollars, people say, Becky, why can't we use this for salaries? You could easily do a 10%, that's only like $16 million. You could do big salary raises. Here's the challenge with that, and I'll work right here because it's a little closer. So we're going to do two scenarios. Okay, so here's scenario 1, and we're going to talk about scenario 2. So let's say in this one, you make $1,000 a month. And let's say my expenses are $1,500 a month. And let's say that my savings has $2,000 in it. So month 1, I bring in $1,000, I have to pay out $1,500, whoop, I got to dip into my savings. So now I only have $1,500 left in the savings, but that's all right, I'm okay so far. Month 2, 1,050, oh, I need another 500, right, to make ends meet. Well, to make a long story short, this is going to go ahead and last me for 4 months. Then my savings is empty because savings is one time, yet I'm trying to use my savings for an expense that happens month after month after month after month. That's dangerous. Recurring salaries happen month after year after year after year. So if I were to keep dipping into this, then I could erode that fund balance to a place that is not healthy for our organization, just like what happens here. If we look at a different scenario, $1,000 in income, let's say $1,000 in expenses, savings $2,000. Each month now, what I bring in, I'm paying, I have my savings. Oh man, refrigerator broke. I need to spend $800 at Home Depot for a new refrigerator. Okay, I spend it. So I knocked myself down to $1,200 in my savings account. But guess what? Next month, I don't need another refrigerator. And the next month, I don't need another refrigerator. And then, so I have my savings there because I used my savings for a one-time expense, a refrigerator. That's not happening every month. That's what we did with the bonuses that happened in January. Remember those $1,700 bonuses for the full-time staff, and then it was prorated if you're not full-time. We used, in January, when we present the mid-year budget to the Board of Education, we had dollars in our unassigned fund balance that we could put towards pay for these bonuses. So we did these bonuses. It turned out to be about $4.7 million to pay for that, but it was one time. So when that chunk came out, like the refrigerator, I don't have to replicate that payment every month. If I did, I would erode this down. So that's why we have to be careful with using our reserve for ongoing expenses like salaries that happen over and over again, as opposed to a one-time expense. And again, that's a popular question I get, so I hope if you had that question, I certainly hope it was helpful. Allison, are there other questions out there?
There are. Okay, so we've got 3 so far. So the first one, we're going to go back to the beginning just a little bit, but it's around having military bases in your property. So does having students on a military base help or hurt us in per pupil funding?
So here's what happens. It really doesn't, per pupil funding, a student, if they're our student, they count, okay, whether they live on a military base or not. I think what you're referring to is the fact that on federal land, we don't receive property taxes for that. So that's where, remember impact aid? That's that thing that you do in the fall where we put all those surveys out and we have people let us know, hey, I'm affiliated with military or what have you. There's 2 aspects to impact aid. One is we get an amount of money from the federal government that compensates for the fact that some of our school district sits on the Air Force Academy and is a federal property that does not get doesn't generate property taxes. And just like Mr. Gregory, who's the former CFO, I sit, he used to in his role, but now once I've taken that role, I sit on an organization, it's called FLISA. And I actually am leaving for Washington, D.C. this Saturday. There's 4 times a year that this organization meets, and there's a national one as well called NAFIS. And this is an organization at the federal level where we advocate for these dollars that impacted school districts that have federal land in their boundary receive money from the federal government to compensate for the fact that we are not getting those property tax revenues. Then another source of money is those military or those federally connected students. Every federally connected student, because their parents live on base and the child lives on base and they work for the government, or maybe they're in the military but they live off base, or there's every different combination. But for those students as well, we get some revenue. To give you an idea, and these numbers can fluctuate, but in a typical year for each type, maybe about $1.7 million each, and that helps to have, like I call it, revenue replacement. So the federal government recognizes there's some additional burden on school districts where they have federal land within their boundary.
Okay, so the next one, I'm going to go back over here. So what is the benefit of an MLO if the amount in the bucket does not ultimately increase?
Okay, great question. So let's put that bucket up again. There is something called a School Finance Act levy. Okay, and School Finance Act is that's what the legislature that they vote into law in May. And that is 27 mils. It is that gives us the blue part of the bucket. Okay, that's the dollars that go in down here. It's part of this School Finance Act levy. And then the state puts the rest in. The MLO is different. It's not part of this bucket. You can think of an MLO in essence of helping us with the gap at the top, but it's not part of the bucket. Get a completely different color. I'm looking for one. If I had like orange or something, here, that looks different. MLO, it's its own thing. We already have 2 MLOs that were passed in the past by our community at a total amount of about 27,600,000. You don't need all the amount, but look, I'm about to put another 26. All these numbers seem to be really similar, but about another 26 million that we already collect each year in MLO. But with this mill levy override question, if there is approval, and of course the Board of Education approval in the sense that focus groups are saying we're interested, and the board says we'd like to move forward, and if that passed, then we would be able to increase the amount that we're collecting from MLO dollars, and we would tell the voters, this is what we want to spend it on. Salaries, benefits, whatever other things that if we move forward, the community, we would all, there'd be collaboration on what would go in there. So those dollars are independent. So before, when I said we really need local intervention the best we can, because we don't think the funding mechanism from the state is going to get us to the place we'd like to go with salaries and benefits. That's what I mean. This is the funding mechanism from the state. 27 mills we collect goes in the bucket. This is separate. This is us doing our own fund collections, if you will, voter approved to pay. Another type of a similar thing here, different concept, but a bond. That's where we get money from debt, almost like a big mortgage, that our constituents say, yep, we're willing to support that so you can build buildings. And we carry debt and we collect money to pay down the debt. These two things are independent of this bucket. And no, we're not looking at a bond measure. We had that in 2016. That's for the buildings we built. This MLO, this is where it could generate resource for us in terms of salaries and benefits. Independent. Now, does it help us, if you will, kind of think of that's a good mechanism for getting that gap of that budget stabilization factor? Yes, but it does not mess with this bucket. It doesn't change the size of it or anything. It's extra, different.
Okay. So, because we're 177 out of 178, correct?
Yes.
They were hoping you could recap the factors that make us be so low.
Yep. So here's some examples of factors. Cost of living. What's the cost of living here in our area? Two biggies are the size of the school district and the amount of at-risk students. The smaller you are, your per pupil revenue is actually bigger in most cases. Not all, but if I have 100 students, then I might have $19,000 per student because I have no economy of scale. So we're a larger school district, so that's going to push our number of per pupil revenue down. And then when you think about our at-risk population, again, do we have at-risk students? You mean, students eligible for free or reduced lunch? Absolutely. But when you compare to some other school districts, like a D11, our number is considerably lower. So those are two of the big factors that push our dollar amount to second to last in the state. We are something called floor funded. It means we're one of some school districts that are at the bottom, and there are other school districts in the Pikes Peak region that tend to be on that lower amount. But like I said, we're second to last.
Okay, so this one, I think we got it. So why doesn't the state give the same amount, allowing us to overfill our budget if they had that amount to give, if we didn't get the extra money from property taxes?
Yeah. They just don't do that. They, in fact, to help answer that question, I want to show you something. It doesn't have a whole lot of impact here on District 20, and I'll show you in a minute. So some school districts, the max you can levy is 27 mills. That's just a portion, a tax rate. that's what we collect for our School Finance Act, for our bucket dollars. 27's the max. District 20 last year or the year before was like about as close as you can get. We were at 26.952. There is something at the state level, it's got a fancy name called mill levy equalization. What does that mean? The state said, look, all the school districts who are not levying all the way up to 27 mills, you're making it really tough for us because I still have to put all this sand. So they said, everybody has to go to 27 mills. For us, it was so small, and we made that change for this year. This time we have 27 mills. Some school districts, though, are levying 17 mills, 15 mills, and the state said you have got to come up to 27. Those locations have to go up 1 mill per year to get to the 27, but the state said you can't be below anymore. You've got to come up. And I hope that illustrates a little bit that the state is recognizing if they can push more school districts up to this 27 mills, then hopefully they're thinking they can not have to put so much sand in everybody's bucket. But it's just not how it works. They don't give you a break when you put a little bit more sand in. It's just, my answer is, it's just not how it works from the state. But the state recognizes and is pushing districts, although it may take literally years and years and years for some, to get everybody to come up, because then they'll have, you know, a better chance of having sand to fill the buckets more and buy down that budget stabilization factor that we talked about, which is that gap at the top, to start to shrink that. But it's kind of like an all for one, one for all. Everybody has a part in that budget stabilization factor. And that's kind of how that one works.
Those are our only questions. So I just told everyone we have 3 minutes left, so we could take 30 seconds and see if any more questions come in. And then if not,
well,
we'll call it.
Well, if you're thinking you have another question while you're doing that, I just want to say thank you. I know how busy you are. To give me an hour of your time, 3:15 or 4:15, I certainly hope that you found it helpful. And if you have any questions, I know that Allison and her team are recording. One of these will be made available for you to see, but you can always also reach out to me. And if it's an easy question, I'll shoot you back an email. If it's not, I'll probably ask to talk to you. You could probably tell I do better if I'm able to talk it and explain it. So always here to help if you have a question. But I just so appreciate you taking this time, and thank you for all you do. I say this every time. My son is 8, his name is Holden, and he goes, he's in 2nd grade at DCC Elementary, and every staff member, whether it's his teacher, the security officer, the secretary, the health monitor, because my son, or the health room clerk, my son has asthma, they all treat him like gold every day. He loves to go to school, and it's because of you. And I know you might not know my Holden, but you know all the kids who come to school just to see you. So thank you for all you do. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a rest of the great school year. And when we start to figure more of this out, as that cone of uncertainty shrinks, we get closer, more information to come. But thank you for all you do. Bye.